Next up is question number 3 of RACE-2 of the Secureum Bootcamp. This one is once again about reentrancy. I will not explain reentrancy again. We have done that in previous races and it is exhausting, and maybe it's also exhausting to listen to me explaining the same things over and over again. So here it says that reentrancy protection only on join, so we only have reentrancy protection, so a reentrancy guard modifier was only applied on the join function, which we can see right here, non-reentrant, which is a modifier that comes from the fact that the Secureum DAO is implementing the reentrancy guard contract or extending the reentrancy guard contract, which comes from the Open Zeppelin package, the reentrancy guard.sol here. So going back to the question, we are to assume it's correctly specified. So I will assume what this means is that the fact that only the join function has reentrancy protection means that only the join function needs reentrancy protection, basically. So that indicates that, so what does the fact that only join has and only join needs reentrancy protection, what does this indicate? So we have two options. One says that only payable functions require this protection because of handling message value. And we can immediately say that this is not correct because this has nothing to do with the function being payable or with message value. As we already said, reentrancy is about the function making an external call. This other contract, that is this other address that it is calling, could potentially then take over the execution, and then the problem might be that the function that made the external call hasn't finished updating the state completely yet, and this incomplete state update can then be exploited by this other contract by re-entering into the contract. So has nothing to do with it being payable or with it having handling message value. So definitely not A. And then we have B. Join likely makes untrusted external calls, but not the other contract functions. So I'm a little bit torn on B because yes, for a reentrancy to be exploitable, for a reentrancy vulnerability to exist, there must be an external call. So yes, join probably has an external call that it makes, otherwise the reentrancy protection would be pretty pointless. But there is one important thing here that could be misunderstood when reading this question, because it makes it sound like that only functions that make external calls need the reentrancy, the non-reentrant modifier. Only functions that make external calls need the reentrancy protection. But that is not true, because only because join makes an external call into another contract, this other contract could re-enter our contract through any other function as well. And that's important because for the state is incomplete not only for the join function which made the external call, the state is also incomplete for all the other functions. So it's totally valid that there could be a problem still if join has it but the others don't, because the others might also be exploitable from this incomplete state. But in this case it specifically says that we are to assume that the fact that only join has this reentrancy protection is correct. So based on that, let's assume that only join needs it, and if only join needs it, then probably join makes an external call, and it might not be following the checks, effects, interactions pattern, and that's why it needs this protection. So yes, in that case, B is definitely correct. But as I said, one could argue that just because it has a non-reentrant modifier applied on it doesn't really indicate that only it needs it, basically, but we are to assume that. And the most important point here is make really sure that only the join function needs reentrancy protection, because just because only join makes the external call doesn't mean that anyone has to re-enter through join. They can re-enter through any other function, and those functions will not be protected because those functions will not have the non-reentrant modifier applied on them. And in that case, this incomplete state could still be exploited. And that's a very important point that I think many would miss here. But under these assumptions, as I said, B is indeed correct. Join would have an untrusted external call. And C and D cannot be it. And that is question number 3.